Episode 148 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast, along with Matt Dernlan. I'm Jason Bryant. Special guest today, volunteer assistant coach at the University of Michigan, coming out of Ann Arbor, Dave Bolyard. Dave, we're going to a couple things we're going to talk about today, including what's going on at the University of Michigan, a lot of things with the Cliff Keen Wrestling Club and the international scenes going on, and a lot of question marks surrounding that. And of course, there's a topic that we'll get to eventually that hits both you and I really close to home. But first, let's just talk about what the season was like leading up to the cancellation and how were things going. A lot of wrestlers were redshirting, looking for Tokyo 2020. And what was the mood like in the wrestling room there in Ann Arbor, before, the wheels fell off of the season?
I mean, really positive. I thought, given the team that we were wrestling, knowing that we were going to be redshirting, returning All-Americans, our best guys statistically, man, I was really proud of just how much better our guys got from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, how hard they fought, how hard they trained. It was really positive. Everyone coming together, and I was proud with how, like I said, how much better we got and the attitude of our guys.
And there were guys that came out of the woodwork, really. I mean, look at a guy like Jack Medley, who, was pretty good coming out of high school, but didn't have the credentials that the studs that you guys have that are going to be wearing the maize and blue. For example, a guy that you guys are looking to start later on, Kurt McHenry, as he grows into the weight class. But guys like Jack Medley just progressed and got better throughout the year. What was it like to watch the development of the guys that the wrestling community at large would probably look at and view as unheralded?
Yeah, I know we talked a lot about it at the beginning of the year. We're on a different side of things. We get to see these guys day in and day out. I don't know how much Jack was that much of a surprise to us because we've seen him train for 2 years. We've seen him compete with, some of the good guys we had in our room. But no one's talking about Jack going into the year. Jack got better through this year as well. I mean, Jack's one example. But if this is talked about a lot, but if you've seen Jack train, you wouldn't be that surprised. I mean, the kid trains really hard, really into it, super committed, not just in the room, and committed to living the right lifestyle outside the room too. So, really, you think about development. I was telling this to Sean, at the end of the year, it's like 60% or more of the development is the kid, and the kid wanting to do it, and the kid willing to commit to do what's needed to do it. And certain part of it is coaching, but a lot more of it's the kid. And Jack's just an unbelievable kid. I mean, we have kids that I feel like are developing and getting really good. We have kids that don't develop as fast. And I don't think the coaching changes. Sometimes it's just the level of commitment from that kid. So Jack's a great example, but like I said, we have other examples of guys that are doing it right and developing, getting better. So like I said, really positive. I know as a staff, we were really proud of how our guys competed, where we were at going into nationals. We were excited for the opportunity, I can tell you that.
Who were you most impressed with the development on this team? So sorry, Matt, to cut you off, but I'm just curious. Obviously, Medley's the one thing, but who are some guys that you got thrown in there that you actually were surprised about their development in a positive way?
I mean, Jack's definitely one of them, just because Jack, doesn't get the opportunity when he's not the starter to go prove himself. But when you have guys on your team that don't have unbelievable credentials, sometimes you worry, like in big matches, do they believe they can win that match? And he did. I mean, there were several times in big matches where it got tough, and that's exactly where he wants it to be. He wants it to be a tough, hard-fought, grinded-out match. Some of Jack's problem before that was the gap early in the match was too wide for him to come back from. But proud of Joe Silva. I mean, not to get into a lot of Joe's situation, but Joe had to fight through a lot to even put himself in the situation. Cole Matton. I think Cole Matton might be the guy that surprised me the most. And not from a wrestling ability standpoint, but just you're getting thrown in as a true freshman into the Big Ten schedule, and the mentality and how he competed. And, I really wholeheartedly thought Cole could be but not at the beginning of the year, but towards the end of the year, watching him wrestle some of these guys, and like Moran from Wisconsin, who's really good, and some of these other guys. And he reminded me of Sidarian a couple years ago when he got to go to nationals, and then he took advantage of it, and he just was wrestling fearlessly. And for a true freshman to do that in the Big Ten, I was very impressed with Cole. And again, not so much from an ability standpoint, but just how well he dealt with the pressure and the mentality of going out there and competing, and he did it fearlessly. So, I mean, I was proud of Kanan. Lots of those guys. Obviously, Mason's made huge strides. That was expected. I mean, he was a raw superstar athlete coming in that hadn't focused on wrestling. But there's work that needs to be done. He did the work. He got bigger. He got stronger. He got better. It's kind of like one of those things where I felt like everyone started to get in that groove, and they started to feed off each other as far as getting better, and that mentality of competing, not scared to lose. And when you get to that point, and that point's at this level, that's the hardest point, to get to that point where you train so hard and you can go out there and you're not scared to lose. You're just willing to go put it out there, and whatever happens, happens. That's easy to say. Very, very few guys get to that point mentally, but I felt like we had quite a few guys that had gotten to that point mentally. And when you get to that point, wrestling's fun. Before that point, wrestling's stressful, and it's not that much fun. But we had quite a bit of guys that were bought in, and they were getting to that point. And like I said, it's fun when you get there mentally.
So Dave, as you're talking about the development of these guys, and it sounds like a bunch of these guys were gaining momentum at the right time. How much of that was them, the experience of just getting thrust into the Big Ten competition, and how much was it them actually believing, like, no, I am the guy. It doesn't matter like who's in red shirt, who people are saying we could have in the lineup. This is my spot. I'm going to take ownership of it, and I'm going to show you what I can do once I get given the opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for those guys that hadn't had the opportunity and trying to take advantage of the opportunity they have, because they've been in a situation where they weren't the guy before and they were owning it. They were going after it. I don't know if anyone was looking for enough ahead to look at next year. That wasn't how we approached it. I remember the first day of practice, we sat down and said, hey, here are the rankings. No one thinks that much of you guys for the most part. We think we got a good team here. So, let's prove it. And I don't know, I just feel like they embraced it. They embraced that whole part of it. They embraced the opportunity they have. Like Cole's a good example where he wrestled this year. I mean, it might have been, it'll be harder for Cole to wrestle next year. It made more sense for him to wrestle this year. And they embraced it. And it really was. I mean, I've been a part of years where it's not that much fun. It's even when you win, it's not that much fun. And I've been a part of years where, it's a lot of fun because you get to that point. And the other thing I'll say, and I say this a lot, and I think this was something that we talked a lot about, is we thought that we would get better throughout the year because a lot of those guys hadn't had the opportunity, like you mentioned, Matt. We thought as the year went on, they would get better. But the other thing that we really believed in was that, and Jack's a good example, and so was Cole and some of those other guys, we had moved up Kanan, weight class-wise. We had thought as we got later in the year, these guys would get better. And we also thought because they weren't killing themselves to make weight, that some of these other guys would start falling off. And we would start catching fire at the right time because all that stuff hadn't caught up to us. Our bodies would still be underneath us. We're still able to train the way we wanted to train. We still had the right mindsets. And I'm not a very big advocate for cutting weight, but it makes sense sometimes. But those guys that cut weight, it takes a lot out of you physically, but a lot mentally. You get to February and you're counting the weigh-ins, and you're thinking about it being over with instead of the opportunity that you have in front of you to go be an All-American or national champ. Jack's a good example because Jack, is an extremely disciplined person, but the weight was he never would let it get in that situation, but he's just not, he's a good size 25-pounder. He's not too big. He's not too small. And as we got to the second semester, guys that were beating him, he was beating. Guys that he barely beat at the beginning of the year, he was crushing. He lost the Northwestern kid. By the end of the year, he beat him. Tournament gets a little different. I think he lost him in the tournament in double overtime. But, we And I thought our guys bought into that too. So we had guys, we got in the dual season and we're beating guys that had beaten us earlier, because we had guys that hadn't been through the ringer and they got better being in the fire, and B, because we didn't have too many guys killing themselves to make weight. They were ready to go in February.
Dave, when it comes to making weight, we had touched on before we started about you wrestling in high school and making 143 in Fargo. And the first year I ever saw you wrestle, I was like, who is this behemoth? And I'm just getting into the national scene as you're out there wrestling Jesse Jansen in the Fargo finals. You are just chiseled. You're like built like a Greek god with these bowling balls for shoulders. And you were saying that was one of the worst weight cuts of your life. I mean, how much of your experiences about weight cutting come from your own experience or coaching these kids go through your own experiences and some of the misery that you had put yourself through?
A lot of it. All right. So I was telling you before we got on, and that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, was make 143 that summer. And I actually made 143 as a sophomore, junior, and senior at that tournament. And it was really, my junior year was hard. And then my senior year, I planned on going 154, and I tore my meniscus at the high school nationals and had surgery. And Ryan Bertine, who I grew up wrestling with and was good friends with, was going to wrestle 154. But the way they had it in Ohio then was they only had one spot you could petition for, because if there were so many people that wrestled in the state tournament, I think the number, let's say it was 16. If they had 16 guys, they were going to take the top 3 guys from the freestyle state tournament, and then you had one spot to petition to. Well, neither one of us got to wrestle at the state tournament, so we were both going to petition for the same weight class. And I just said I would go down to 43. So it was really hard. But as far as the weight cut and my own experience, my whole experience, I'll try to be short about this. My whole life of wrestling, I cut lots of weight until I got to the end of college. And trying not to sound arrogant, but I never felt like I ever lost one wrestling match because the guy was a better wrestler than me or he was stronger than me. I lost wrestling matches because I was exhausted, right? And I would get exhausted in the middle of the second period, and I never, for the life of me, until I stopped cutting weight, put it together. But I trained so hard. Like it was so frustrating to me to train the way I was training, to compete the way I would compete in practice, and then go out and then in the middle of the second period be in survival mode and never actually connect the dots to cutting weight. I would always go back to, I'm not training right. I must be doing something wrong with my training, right? And then I was going to Olympic redshirt my junior year in college, so I figured if I'm going to go wrestle 174 kilos, so 163, I might as well wrestle 165 in these college opens at the beginning of the year. So I started to do that, and I won the Michigan State Open. I actually lost the last second to I always get the King from Edinburgh, who took 3rd or 4th in the country that year. But it's the older one. There was
Matt King.
Yeah.
Which is a great wrestling name, by the way.
Yeah. So anyway, I was beating him. He was returning All-American. I got reversed at the end, lost that match. And then I beat Johnny Clark, who was a 3-time All-American at Michigan State Open. The next week, I beat Pat Owen from Michigan, who was really tough in the finals. And even through that, because I've been scarred so long of being tired, like I'm holding myself back because I just know I'm going to get exhausted and end up not redshirting. And it took me like a month to figure out like I could actually wrestle for 7 minutes now, because I was so scarred for my whole life of being exhausted. I would hold myself back, and still I was winning matches because I still had enough gas to wrestle at the end, but not really letting myself go. And then I think it clicked for me around Midlands, where I was like, man, I can just be myself and wrestle. And I got to a place, like we talked about mentally, where wrestling was fun. I wasn't holding myself back. I wasn't putting that much pressure on myself. And I can remember the Midland semifinals. I'm wrestling Nick Pasolano from Iowa State. It was pretty darn tough. And I just felt so confident that he was going to get exhausted, and I wasn't, which that didn't happen. That was always the other way around for me. But I felt so confident. But I think I went out and got 2 takedowns like in the first 2 minutes of the match. And there was like an injury time or a break in the match. And Coach Borelli's like, slow down. Like worried that I was going to get exhausted. I'm like, I got this. Like, I'm not getting tired. And it just like kind of clicked for me right around Midlands that I could just go be myself and wrestle. And it was not like I didn't have to worry about the conditioning side of it anymore. So yeah, since then I've really, because I knew what it did for me, there's certain situations where you have to lineup wise to fit in for your team. And if you're going to do it, you got to be very disciplined. I would say, we try to get our guys to live within 7 to 8% of the weight. So, and there's a descent process down. But if you're going to do it, you have to live at the weight class. You have to be able to train around the weight class, around what you're actually going to compete at. If you don't do that, you're fooling yourself. If you're coming into practice Monday at 12 to 15 over and thinking you're going to practice or compete the same way you practice, you're wrong. It won't happen. So if you're going to do it, then you got to live and train at 5 or 6 pounds over, which is what you'll be after an hour or 2 hours of rehydrating. And if that's too hard for you, I'd tell you to go up, but.
Now, how much of that, Dave, is knowing your athletes and almost at some point having to make that decision for them, knowing like, hey, coach, because your athletes are always going to tell you what you want to hear, right? No, I got this, coach. How much of that is like recognizing, and I think a lot of it is the level of maturity in your guys, and because you understand the level of dedication. Like it's one thing to say, I've got to walk around at 6 to 8 pounds a year. People think, oh, I can do that. There's a bigger reality making the commitment to doing that. And how much do you guys work with your athletes to inform that decision, or how much do you let the athletes drive that decision?
As far as which weight?
Yeah, as far as like understanding, like, okay, you may say you could do that, but I know I have an understanding of who you are and how you operate. Like what you say you're going to do is probably not the reality of how it's going to end up. So I'm better off like confronting that reality, having that conversation and saying, well, you may be better served to do it this way.
Yeah. Again, some of that, for me, it's all you can do is try to show examples. I can tell my story. I can also tell several other stories of guys that went up weight classes that didn't do it, that did way better. I will say, different body types can handle it better. Like my body type couldn't handle cutting weight. I was built to sprint. Those ones, those guys are really fast twitch. They don't do as well. Alec Pantaleo doesn't do as well cutting the weight class. The other part of that too, because you see guys that cut lots of weight, they get away with it. And collegiate wrestling, if you're good on top, you can slow the match down. So you see the guys that get away with it a lot, they're good on top. So an example, and this is how I would answer those questions, Matt, is, who's that guy? Like Alec. Alec wanted to go 49. It made sense on paper. And on paper, that's his best chance. He's got to beat Knopf to be an NCAA champ, or he's got to beat other good guys, but, Knopf is Knopf. Right? So on paper, it makes sense to go 149. But then he gets down to 149. He's not very good on top. He's extremely explosive, fast twitch, and he's not himself, So it's like, I'd rather you be the best version of you out there going after it than, 75 to 80% of what you are and losing to guys that you shouldn't lose to. Like that's, you can accept going out there as hard as you can and losing to a guy like Jason Knopf. But then you go out there and you're not who you are because of the weight cut, and then trying to go out there and then you lose the guys that you just know you're better than. That eats at you. So to answer that question, I would just say I'm going to point to examples. I'll say Kanan Storr. Kanan Storr is built like a certain person. I can look at other people that he knows, like not guys from my era, because I'm too old for him to know too many guys from my era, but current guys that are wrestling, that are built like him, that wrestle like him, and we can point to examples of like, hey, like this guy went up the weight class, it didn't affect him. It only made him better, and you're built like this guy and you can wrestle like this guy. It's tough because at the end of the day, I have to trust you. And I think we have a lot of guys that trust in us, which is awesome. But if they're not bought in, they're not committed to it. They, at the end of the day, I usually they make the decision. because if they don't believe it, it's not going to work. They have to believe it's the right decision, not me. So if they think the right answer is going down a weight class, then I'd say, hey, if that's what you want to do, this is how you have to live it. And I'll be there to check your weight. I'll be there to monitor and make sure you're doing it the right way. If you think that's what's next. But sometimes it's like, I don't know if that's going to be the right answer. So you want them to make the decision, because again, when you make a decision for them, they don't agree with it, that never ends well.
Now, Dave, moving forward to a next topic of conversation, a couple years ago, you were doing a pretty good job at that school in Ypsilanti at Eastern Michigan University. You had some kids that were punching through. You had the first All-American since actually the previous coach. Actually, it was that year. It was a different guy, but Del Porto actually placed that year, I believe. But we're looking at it, and Zadarian Perry hit the podium. Again, a guy that started wrestling late, had the right tournament, things hit at the right time. You guys were doing the right things. You were getting the all-MAC academic selections and things of that nature, and then the program, along with some others, were dropped. And while some of those things were put in process by the leadership prior to Scott Weatherby's arrival, it ultimately fell on his hands, and then the decision was made. And going through that as a coach, and then 2 years later watching one of your athletes who you said, all right, you know what, Old Dominion's a place for you to get another shot. And to see it happen for another school that's a MAC affiliate, and a school that was getting the all academic selections. They were getting wrestlers on the podium. I mean, what was it like to see this unfold for you 2 years after your own program was cut?
Once you've lived it and you fully understand how it affects people, it's hard. I mean, it really I'd be lying if it was the same exact feeling, but you start getting that feeling back in your stomach again, and you start getting to that place you were in 2 years ago. And it's terrible, and it'll never make sense to me. I think it's a lot of times it's short-sighted. I think there are solutions to the problem, but they don't either want to do the work, or they don't even want to look for the answers. So, I mean, to answer your question, it's terrible. I mean, it takes you personally back to a place, and you can empathize with their coaching staff. You can empathize for the kids that are in that situation. And I remember having that talk with our team and how hard it was, it sucked. So yeah, I'll be scarred by that for the rest of my life, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, having it go through, even though everybody knows I was not an active college wrestler. I was not on the team. I was never rostered. I was part of the program as the announcer. I lived with the guys, and going through this as an alum has, and I think everybody knows how much of an assault I put on your administration socially when they ignored media requests, and they just said, nope, this is how it's going to be. Now they're getting sued for all sorts of Title IX issues with the sports they cut in order to save money, yet they have a football field that looks like a giant ashtray. That notwithstanding, this hurts from an alumni standpoint. It hurts from, a coaching standpoint, because Eastern was putting alum out there. Even if they weren't starters, they were putting those alumni into the coaching profession at the high school level. A lot of EMU alumni are out there coaching high school kids in Michigan. The same back in my home state, my home area. My own high school was coached. I was coached by an Old Dominion wrestling alum. My current high school is coached by an Old Dominion wrestling alum. So this one hits me on so many different levels. And from the standpoint of what goes through the coach's mind here, there are certain things you could and couldn't say after this process. So maybe help people understand what the head coach deals with in this situation when there's so much you want to say and you really can't, because there's certain, I don't know if there's NDAs. I mean, talk about the process of what happens with you as an individual in that time frame after it's cut, and you just want to let loose and you really can't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was, I guess my situation was I thought we were going to win the fight. And so when you're doing that, you can't just go out there and say what you want to say. So, we were being calculated, and I wanted my cake, and I wanted to eat it too. So I wanted to win the fight, get our program reinstated, and still be the head coach of the program. So if that was the goal, you can't just fly off the handle and say what you want to say. So that was a lot of it. There also is, I'm trying to think of the right word, but, severance, so there's a severance, and if you break severance, then you're not going to get paid your 4.5 months or whatever it is. That was my contract of my severance. If I said certain things, that would not have stopped me from saying things. I could, at that point, like, I wanted to win that fight. I wanted our program back. I wanted to keep being the coach of it. I didn't even think about if we didn't, the 4 months of salary was, but which is another point. They didn't pay. They paid that 4 months. I still had another year on my contract. They didn't pay. So they honored all those other guys. They didn't honor my contract. Yeah, it's a tough balance because just as a person, I just didn't feel like I should come off and say some of the things you're thinking. But I mean,
didn't stop a lot of the alumni and maybe even some family members from chiming in there. That's for sure.
No, I think the head of that was when our football coach started calling me. One about Mike Kirby, who was an alumni, because Mike had everyone that said every football player that said they got an offer from Eastern Michigan, he would comment on that tweet and tell them like that they should reconsider and have you seen what's going on? And so the football coach called me about that, and then about a month.
I'm really close to doing that with my alma mater, I can tell you that, but I'm also waiting to hold it. I'm gonna hold out some hope that we can get it back before I start just lighting a fire to my degree. Like I said, you can see around me, my room is blue, white, and silver. I've said that a couple places, so I'm holding off before I get really nasty. But I'm just waiting for if we lose all hope, duck and cover signees. Anyway, continue.
This was after April 20th when they decided it wasn't going to happen, and there's a lot of alumni and people still out there making comments, and I don't even remember what the tweet was, but my wife replies to the tweet, and it's about our football coach, Chris Creighton. And I was at Michigan. I was already working at Michigan at the time, and Chris Creighton calls me. I got a voicemail because we were in practice, and then afterwards he wants to have a meeting and talk with my wife. And I was like, Chris, that's not going to happen. You're not going to sit down and meet with my wife. If you want to talk to me, I'll talk to you. Right? You want to sit down and meet with me? I'll talk to you. I'll talk to my wife. If she said something that's inappropriate, I will talk to her. So the next day my wife updated her Twitter. I think it still is this way, that her thoughts and views are her own and not those of her husband. So, but yeah, I mean,
all of us that are married know that to be the case anyway, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm sure it's getting that way with Old Dominion too. I mean, it's personal. And these programs and these coaches and the experience that these athletes have had, it means a lot to them. I don't think I really remember when Scott sat me down and we're having this meeting, he tells me he's going to cut the program. And I said, Scott, you have no idea how ugly this is going to get. And he's like, no, I think I do. I said, Scott, you have no clue. You have no clue. And I said, we just made a lot of noise at the NCAA tournament. We're coming off a lot of, good, positive things. And you're going to try to pull our program out from underneath us.
Yeah, you're checking all the boxes that you're supposed to do. It's okay. Your program, don't be a liability academically. Don't be a liability to the community. Good, you're checking all the boxes that non-revenue programs are supposed to do. You're doing it the way they lay out the format. It's like, hey, this is what we're supposed to do. You're following the lead.
Yeah, I mean, we won the academic team award. We were top 10 every year. Socially was never an issue. I was really hard on those guys socially. I mean, it was something that was instilled in us at Central about trying to live the right lifestyle, and a lot from Casey Cunningham, to be honest. And I was on those guys, so we really didn't have problems socially. We were starting to turn the corner. The hardest part for me was all the work that went into that, and finally getting to a point where that hard work starting to pay off, and all those years of building that foundation, and you're starting to get where you want to get, and then you don't get a chance to see it through. Because all but Gage, who was hurt at the NCAA tournament that year, were underclassmen. Most of those guys were sophomores. They're seniors this year. Like that was my first recruiting class. Sedarian Perry, Noah Gonzer, Zach Carson.
What would that team have been ranked this year? We're looking, I think there were 5 guys, Matt and I talked about, there were 5 guys ranked in the top 20 at one point, which is pretty much unheard of for Eastern Michigan. If you put them all on the one team, and, they were mostly at different weight classes. So you're like, you can actually look at it and be like, this is a team that could have made some noise and put more than one on the podium.
Yeah, we definitely had that potential. I felt like the momentum was going that way. We had good incoming recruits too that, we were high on Austin Emerson, who ended up going to Nebraska. Fenton, was a kid that was under the radar named Branson Proudlove from Michigan that we thought highly of. He was part of my wrestling club, so I had a good understanding of what the kid was like. So, and we had those guys. We had good guys coming in. I don't know, just it felt like it was all finally coming together, and then you don't get to see it through and see what could have been. That's the part that eats at you.
Last part I'm going to touch on, because this is also, again, we're hearing the same type of excuses or lack of communication from the administration at my alma mater, Norfolk, and it's the study, the strategic review that they cited, saying that the investment in football and basketball, and at Old Dominion there's a women's basketball program that actually draws some fans too, so it's not just men's basketball and football here. But at Eastern Michigan, the bowl that they'd made, they were actually oddly enough beaten by Old Dominion in the Bahamas Bowl, and the only bowl win ODU has, and it was like one of those like, aha, you cut wrestling, that's what happens to you. And then now I'm kind of eating those words. But you look at, as a coach of a non-revenue sport or an Olympic sport, that again, you're always kind of behind when it comes to finances, to see the effort putting, basically, okay, this football program is on fire. Instead of putting it out with water, let's put it out with more money. I mean, how frustrating is it to see schools like Eastern and schools like Old Dominion throw money into a group of 5 football? I mean, it just came out that the group of 5 wants this proposal to drop the number of minimum sports required for Division I. It seems like, who else can survive if you're going to throw all this money to make a middling bowl game that's on like a Tuesday at 3:00? I'm sure that's got to weigh on you a little bit. Just like as an alum, oh great, we beat Virginia Tech, but that Bahamas Bowl win against Eastern Michigan honestly doesn't move the needle in any sense of the way to me as a contributor to my university. So I mean, what's it like as a coach to know that obviously we're not a priority at this school, and how hard is that to kind of swallow, and what do you how do you tell that to your kids in that meeting? That's the one thing I think I'm struggling the most with personally, is how did Steve Martin, how did Daryl Thomas, how did Steve Blythe, Kevin Beasley talk to these kids that, the university doesn't value us no matter how good we do, because it wasn't about how many All-Americans they had, because they became the winningest men's program in school history since Steve Martin got the job there. So I'm curious on that perspective, on the money suck that is middling 1A football or FCS football, or FBS football, excuse me. First,
there's no correct way to talk to that team, and there's nothing you can, and there really isn't. A lot of it is you're just comforting your guys and telling them you're going to fight, and that's the only thing I could do, is that we're going to fight. And I told them they need to start looking at every opportunity they have. I would be lying to say that they shouldn't do that. They should go do that. And if it gets to that point, I want to help them do that. But give us a couple of weeks to see where we can take this thing. For us, the drop dead was April 20th. And after that, it was, and most of them had, started to find new places. But as far as the football and Old Dominion and Eastern Michigan, I'm a numbers guy. These guys are trying to win the lottery. Tell me who's done it. And who's done it and sustained it? Like, I can
and the attendance sucked in Ypsilanti. I mean, ODU sold out every game that it had in a 20,000 seat stadium its first 9-10 years of existence. This year they were 1-11 and the attendance sucked. Okay, but like at Eastern, there were documents that came out about flubbing the stats or buying tickets from Pepsi or Pepsi buying tickets or something like that. Yeah. It was artificially inflated attendance too.
Yeah, there's I'm not exaggerating when I say this. There were several games where there were 1,000, 2,000 people or less. But
total paid attendance 21,000. ...
All of them are trying to play this lottery where if our team's good enough to sell the stadium out, how much money can we make? Well, A, who's done it? And B, there's been a couple schools that did it, and they did it for like a year, and then they don't have, like Northern Illinois made, whatever you want to, New York or the six top bowl games, whatever you want to call them. But Northern Illinois is not that good in football right now, because by the time that coach takes that program to that level, he goes somewhere else.
PJ Fleck at Western Michigan is an example, going to Minnesota.
Yeah, exactly. And now Western Michigan's not that good. It's not sustainable. You're not in that situation. Quit though, and the amount of money it takes to be good at football is astronomical. You would be smarter as an athletic director trying to be good at basketball, right? If you had 2 superstar basketball players, you were really good. If you had 2 superstar football players, you're not any good. You need 20 good football players, right? That's like winning the lottery 20 times, because there's 85 scholarships across 120 programs. They're full ride or nothing. So now it's not like wrestling where I can say, okay, the University of Michigan's offering you 20% to come here. We're going to offer you a full ride, and we got a chance. In football, it's you received an offer for a full ride or you didn't, right? So the guys that don't get offers are the guys that go to Eastern Michigan, where in wrestling and some of these other sports, you can maybe attract a good athlete.
You need 5 good wrestlers to make an impact at nationals.
Yeah. It's just more realistic, and they're throwing tons. I mean, I think the Old Dominion and Eastern Michigan situation as far as this football stadium, and I think we're collateral. We were collateral. I think the wrestling's collateral there for it. I think there's a lot to that. And I don't know how much the facility is at Old Dominion.
Well, they just renovated it. I think it was in the $60 million range. I mean, I'm a little bit off, but it was
$50 at Eastern Michigan. And if you're talking from a business model, they're not making $50 million because of that facility.
I want to also interject this too. How far is Ann Arbor from Ypsilanti geographically?
Less than 10 miles.
Okay, so if you're a football fan in the state of Michigan and you live in that general facility, where are you going to pay attention? The big house or the factory?
Of course.
I mean, yeah. All right, now as we move forward, I can kick my alma mater in your former place down as much as we can. I don't know if it's going to do any good, at least on this show, but maybe just the awareness. But one thing that you did touch on earlier, you'd mentioned Coach Borelli a little bit, recently named co-MAC Coach of the Year. This is a guy who has been at the helm. Him and John Smith have the longest tenured Division I jobs as it stands right now. He was never a national qualifier at the Citadel. His son Jason's a head coach at Stanford, and talked about that on Twitter the other day. But what is it about Tom Borelli that, one, makes him a great coach, and 2, makes him a great, I guess, the Tom Borelli coaching tree is pretty good. So, I mean, what is it about that you've taken maybe from Tom that's helped you meld with the Maize and Blue associates you have there in Ann Arbor, who are all Michigan people?
First off, Jason's my best friend. Coach Borelli was a huge influence in my life. So still really, really close. I mean, I talk, especially now, I talk to Jason a lot because neither of us have anything going on. But and I talked to Coach maybe a week ago. But it's just from a coaching standpoint. I mean, he's a military guy. He went through the Citadel, so accountability is huge. There was never any workout, any run, anything that we did that didn't have a measure, and you had to meet that measure. If you didn't, you were going to do more. I mean, he comes across like this soft-spoken Southern gentleman, which he is, but not in that wrestling room. He was really hard on me. I can tell you that. He was hard on Jason. He was hard on all of us, and we're better for it. Like I needed to get tougher. When I got to college, I was pretty darn athletic, pretty darn talented. I was not tough enough. And you can't go through his program and not get tough. He's hard on you. And more than that, because there are other coaches out there that are really hard on you. I mean, I could think of a couple off the top of my head, and they're not doing as well as they could be doing because you have to care. All right. And he cared a ton. He cared a ton about her, and he's still a part of my life. I didn't go through there for 4 or 5 years, and that was it. He did his time, and I did my time. He cared. Like like I said, I'm still really close to him. My wife's from the area, so when we go up there, I usually take my kids over to his house. Really close with Mrs. Borelli, and he cared a ton. And on top of that, I mean, he knew what he was doing, obviously wrestling wise. I mean, a lot of it is the kids got to know you care about them. They got to want to follow you, and then you got to know what you're doing. You got to know technically what you're doing. You got to know how to train guys. And there's been some evolution there, and I think he's had to evolve. We've all had to evolve a little bit there, but yeah, I mean, like you said, with the other guys coaching other places. I mean, look at how well some of those programs are doing. Look what Mitch is doing at the high school level at Troy Catholic Central. I know some of these guys aren't head coaches, but look at Penn State. I mean, I'm biased, but I feel like Casey's had an influence there, and he's done a really good job. I see it, especially on top, because Casey wasn't that good on his feet. But you see it. Scotty Sentez, Jason Borelli. I mean, if you look at what they've done at Stanford before he had got there, I do believe Kerry McCoy got the program going in a good direction. But if you look at what they've done there since he got there, I mean, they've had a lot of program first. Really, I think it all came back. The biggest thing I can say about Tom is you were going to be accountable. And I mean, I can remember running sprints, and we had time sprints. If you didn't make it, the whole team was running more sprints. We did a run, we did lifts, anything. I mean, I can't remember, like, there was no like, hey, why don't you guys go for a 3-mile run? Like, that was nowhere near good enough, because I can go run a 3-mile run and put the worst looking look on my face and not really be running that hard. So there was going to be some type of measure to make sure that you were actually running hard. And he wasn't going to let you slip. Like, if you were dogging it, he was calling you out. And there were times where I literally wanted to strangle him. There were a couple times I probably said things I shouldn't have said. But like I said, when you're going through it, sometimes you don't even understand it. I took everything so personally. So when he would do those things to me, it was like he was questioning my work ethic. And like, that's what I hung my hat on, like I wanted to be one of the hardest working guys there. So when he would call me out, I'd be like, this guy, but I needed it. I really did. I wasn't tough enough. And it took me about 5, 6, 7 years after I was done to reflect and see how much it did for me. But yeah, I'm very thankful I chose to go to Central Michigan. I can tell you that.
Last thing we'll speak on is bringing it back to Ann Arbor, bringing it back to Michigan. We don't know when wrestling is going to happen. We don't know what the season would have been like, but we know we've got some guys coming off of red shirts. Some of them we're looking forward to Tokyo. I think the joke's now about Misic is probably going to be able to take 3 Olympic red shirts and maybe across 16 years and still be eligible. But what's that room going to look like next year? How are you guys preparing right now? What can you guys do as coaches to talk to the athletes? I mean, what's the vibe? What's communication like? And what's, I guess, the goals for the squad moving forward when we really don't know when that end point is actually going to be yet?
I mean, one, we're extremely excited. I feel like we had a great team, a team that's capable of competing to win the national team title. Now, we have some work to do. I wouldn't say if we wrestled the tournament today, we'd win it. So that's maybe a little bit of the frustrating part in the situation we're in right now is you can't do a whole lot. We're meeting with our team. We're talking to them, just trying to, keep morale up. And it's when you've been isolated for so long to not be around your guys sucks. But so we're trying to do that. And I know our guys are self-motivated, and a lot of them are doing things on their own. At this point, that's what we're relying on. But just to speak a little bit about the team we have coming back, I mean, we're excited. I mean, we have guys top to bottom. We have depth. We have flexibility in our lineup. I don't know exactly what we'll do with our lineup yet, but, to go back to Matt's question earlier, we're going to probably let some guys make some decisions and see what they think is best for them. Usually those things, if it's best for them, it's usually best for our team. But like I said, we have depth, we have flexibility. I don't know, I'm excited especially if we can keep that momentum and the mentality that we were competing with and developing with with the team that we have next year. Man, it'll be a fun year.
Unique perspective from a guy who's been there, done that, got the T-shirts, and now working with that program in Ann Arbor at University of Michigan, Dave Bolyard. So that's how we'll wrap things up here on episode 148 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast. For Matt Dernlan, I'm Jason Bryant, and along with our guest, David Bolyard. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.